My brother changed the date of his housewarming party to the same day as my son's funeral. He called his death a minor event, and our parents sided with him. But they forgot that the house where he planned the party belongs to me. So he's in for a surprise. The first time I realized my family didn't care about me was the day my son was diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma. It wasn't something they said outright, of course. It's not like my father, Fernando, or my stepmother, Rosa, called me and said, "We don't care, Alejandro." No, that would have been too honest for them. Instead, their silence spoke volumes. Their absence. The way they never asked how Nico was doing. Never offered help. Never even pretended to be concerned. I was drowning in medical bills, working late just to keep the lights on, and yet when my half-brother Ruben called, it wasn't to ask about Nico, but to ask me for money. "I'm a little short on rent this month, Alex," he'd say, as if he hadn't said the exact same thing last month, and the month before, and the month before that. And I paid, of course, because I always did. Because Ruben never learned to stand on his own 2 feet, and I'd spent my whole life hearing that it was my responsibility to hold him up. It had been this way for years, ever since Ruben turned 18 and decided a real job was beneath him. My father shifted his burden onto my shoulders. "You're the responsible one," he'd say. "You're the one who has his life in order." The irony was that my life wasn't in order at all. I was barely keeping it together. I was married once. Now it seems like another lifetime. Back then I had dreams. A house with a garden. A family that wasn't fractured. A life that felt whole. But in the end, all I got was a divorce and full custody of a sick child. My ex-wife, Camila, wasn't a bad person. She just wasn't strong enough for this life. She left when Nico was 5. Her words still haunt me. "I can't do this anymore, Alex. I love him, but I can't watch him suffer. I can't live in hospitals. I can't wake up every morning wondering if today will be the day I lose my son." As if I had a choice. As if I didn't wake up every morning with the same fear choking me. Camila remarried. Moved to another city. Started a new life. Had another child. And Nico never asked about her. I think even at 5, he understood that his mother had chosen to leave. And he understood that I never would. The only good thing that happened in the last few years was the inheritance from my grandparents. The house where I grew up. The small rental apartment that generated steady income. And more recently, the house on the coast, the last gift my grandmother left me before she passed. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, staring at the documents, too exhausted to process them. The house was old. It needed some repairs. But it was mine. Another bit of security for Nico. Or so I thought. The moment my father and Rosa found out about the house, everything changed. "Ruben needs it more than you," Rosa said, as soon as I mentioned the inheritance. "He doesn't have stable housing. It's not fair that one son has so much while the other has nothing." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the audacity of her words. "You mean the brother I've been paying rent for? The one who refuses to get a job? That Ruben?" Rosa's lips tightened. "He's going through a rough patch. He's been going through a rough patch for 15 years. "You don't even need it, Alex," my father chimed in. "You already have your own house. Your income. You're fine." I wanted to scream. I wasn't fine. I was barely making it through each day. I was watching my son fight for his life, sitting through chemo sessions, holding his hand while he cried in pain. And these people, my family, thought I had too much. "You don't know anything about my life," I said, my voice icy. "And if you think I'm going to give Ruben a house when I can barely afford my son's medical bills, you're insane." Ruben didn't even try to hide his entitlement. "Come on, Alex. Don't be selfish. You have everything. I have nothing. You have nothing because you refuse to work for anything." His face twisted into a sneer. "You always thought you were better than me, didn't you?" I exhaled, clenching my fists. "I think I'm tired, Ruben. Tired of carrying you. Tired of being treated like an ATM. Tired of being the only one in this family who cares about anyone but themselves." My father sighed dramatically, rubbing his temples as if I was the difficult one. "Just think about it, Alex." And because I was exhausted, because I didn't have the energy for another fight, I did. I thought about it. And in the end I said yes. I agreed to let Ruben move into the house. But I never signed over the deed. I should have known it wouldn't end there. They always wanted more. Even when I was drowning. Even when I was losing the most important thing in my life. My family only cared about what I could give them. Nico died on a Thursday morning. I remember holding him in my arms, his small hand clinging to mine, his breathing shallow and ragged. He'd fought so hard, longer than the doctors expected, and then just like that he was gone. I don't remember much of the following days. I barely slept. I barely ate. The world became a blur of condolences, paperwork, funeral arrangements. But I remember calling my father. I remember telling him the funeral would be on Saturday. I remember the silence before he spoke. "Oh," he said. "That's a shame. Ruben is having his housewarming party that day." I thought I'd misheard. "What?" "Rosa already made plans," he continued. "We thought it best to support Ruben at this time. You understand." I hung up the phone and never spoke to him again. It was my cousin Javi who told me what happened next. Ruben threw a party at my house. Invited friends. Played music. Drank and laughed while I buried my son. My brother celebrated. "He was talking badly about you," Javi said, hesitating as if unsure whether he should tell me. "He said you were a loser. That you gave everything and got nothing in return." I didn't respond. I simply stood up, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to the police station. Because there was something Ruben had forgotten. The house wasn't his. It never was. When I arrived at the station, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't second-guessing myself. If anything, I felt a strange calm. The officer at the front desk barely looked up when I approached. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said, placing the property documents on the counter. "I want to report a trespassing on my property." The police acted fast. Faster than I expected. By the time I returned home that night, my phone was already blowing up with calls and messages. From my father. From Rosa. Even from Ruben. I let it ring. I let them scream into the void as the messages piled up, one after another. "Fernando, what the hell is wrong with you? You called the police on your own brother. Rosa, you're being completely irrational. We need to talk. Ruben, you think you can do this to me? You'll regret this, Alex. I swear to you." I didn't reply. I just sat in the darkness of my living room, staring at the wall, trying to feel something. I thought evicting Ruben would make me feel victorious, like reclaiming something that had been stolen from me. But all I felt was empty, because none of it mattered anymore. Nico was gone, and I didn't have the strength to keep fighting. The next morning, my father showed up at my house. I should have expected it. I'd barely opened the door when he pushed his way in, slamming it shut behind him. He looked furious, jaw tight, eyes burning with barely contained rage. "What the hell were you thinking?" he spat. I exhaled slowly, rubbing my temples. "Dad, I really don't have the energy for this. Not now." "You don't have the energy?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Then why did you call the police on your brother?" I looked at him, my expression blank. "Because he was trespassing on private property." "He was living there, Alex. You told him he could move in." "I never signed over the house," I replied simply. "That doesn't matter," he spat. "It was a verbal agreement. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Do you know what you've done?" I crossed my arms. "Oh, I'm sorry. I embarrassed you in front of your golden boy." His face darkened. "Watch your tone. Watch yours," I said, my voice sharp. "Because you're in my house yelling at me when you should be apologizing." "Apologizing?" He let out a bitter laugh. "For what?" "For choosing a stupid party over your grandson's funeral," I said coldly. That shut him up. For the first time, his fury wavered. He shifted uncomfortably, averting his gaze. "That's not fair," he muttered.
No, Dad.
"What's not fair is that I buried my son alone while you played happy families with Ruben." He clenched his jaw. "We didn't think." "You didn't think because you never do. Not when it comes to me." His silence was deafening. For a brief second I thought maybe, just maybe, this was the moment. Maybe he would finally look at me and understand what he'd done. But then he sighed, shook his head and said, "Alex, I understand you're upset, but you can't let grief make you irrational." Something inside me snapped. I took a step forward, my voice dangerously low. Get out of my house. He scoffed. Alex, get out of my house. For a moment I thought he would argue. But then he saw it. The rage. The grief. The exhaustion. And for the first time in my life my father backed down. He mumbled something under his breath, turned around and walked out the door. I locked it behind him and didn't look back. I knew this wasn't over. Rosa was next. She called that same night, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Alejandro dear, we need to talk about this. I remained silent. She sighed dramatically. I know you're upset, but do you really think this is the best way to handle things? Ruben has nowhere to go. He had plenty of places to go, I replied coldly. He could have gotten a job and paid for his own apartment for once, like the rest of us do. You don't understand, she insisted. Ruben isn't like you. He's always had difficulties with... Difficulties with what, Rosa? I interrupted, my voice sharp. With acting like an adult? With working for the first time in his life? She let out a slow sigh. I know you're angry, Alejandro. No, I said. You don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't be calling me to lecture me about the man who robbed me while I buried my son. She went silent. And for a second I thought she would let it go. But then she said, this isn't what your grandmother would have wanted. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most pathetic thing I'd ever heard. My grandmother left the house to me, I said. You want to talk about what she would have wanted? She would have wanted Ruben to get a job and stop expecting me to fix his life for him. Rosa clicked her tongue disapprovingly. You're being cruel, Alejandro. No, I said finally. I'm being fair. And I hung up. It didn't take long for Ruben to make noise. A week after being evicted, he sent me a text. Ruben, you'll regret this. I rolled my eyes and ignored it. The next day, Ruben, you owe me, Alex. And then the following day, Ruben, if I can't have the house, no one can. That message made me pause. I stared at the words on the screen, a sense of unease slowly settling in my stomach. I knew Ruben was a parasite, a liar, a manipulator. But this felt different. And when I checked the property's security cameras that night, I discovered why. The images weren't perfectly clear, but they were enough. Enough to see Ruben. Enough to see the bat in his hands. Enough to see him smashing the windows, bashing the walls, destroying the house I'd inherited. The house that was mine. I watched silently, my chest tight, my hands shaking. And then slowly I picked up my phone. I dialed 911. What is your emergency? I exhaled. My brother just vandalized my house, I said, my voice firm. And I have it all on video. Ruben was arrested that same night. I didn't go to the station. I didn't answer his calls. I didn't respond when Rosa texted me at 3 a.m. frantic. Rosa, how could you do this to your own brother? I just sat in my living room, watching the recordings over and over. I watched him destroy what wasn't his. I watched him swing a bat at my grandmother's windows, her walls, her floors. The house she loved. The house she trusted me to take care of. And I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Not even satisfaction. Just empty. As if I had finally run out of emotions. The following morning I got a call from Javi. Dude, he said, his voice still thick with sleep. I just heard. What happened? I sighed. Ruben vandalized the house. I mean, I knew he was, but wow. He really did that. I have it all on video. Javi let out a low whistle. He's in trouble. Yeah, I said, my voice flat. He is. There was a pause. Then cautiously Javi asked, are you okay? No one had asked me that in a long time. Not after Nico got sick. Not after he died. Not after Ruben robbed me. After my father abandoned me. After Rosa tried to guilt-trip me into compliance. No one had asked. And honestly, I didn't know the answer. I don't know, I admitted. Javi was silent for a moment, then said, want to grab a drink? It was 10 a.m., but I almost said yes. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Maybe because the evidence was undeniable. Maybe because Ruben didn't have the money for a good lawyer. Either way, within a few weeks, he was formally charged with vandalism and destruction of property. Rosa called me that same day. Alejandro, she said, her voice strained. I hope you're happy. You've ruined your brother's life. I stared at my phone, wondering how she had the audacity to say those words out loud. Rosa, I said, my tone almost bored. Ruben ruined his own life. She scoffed. You really don't care, do you? I thought about it for a moment and then I said, no, I don't. I hung up before she could respond, and for the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty about it. Ruben lost his job. Not that it was much of a job in the first place. He worked part-time at some warehouse, barely showing up on good days. But still he lost it. Apparently, having criminal charges wasn't very appealing to an employer. Rosa begged me to drop the charges. My father called twice. Once to demand I fix this mess. Another to say Ruben didn't mean it. I ignored them both. Because at the end of the day, this wasn't just about the house. It was about everything. About years of being used, manipulated, made to feel like I owed my family everything while they never gave me anything in return. It was about Nico. About how my father had chosen Ruben's party over his grandson's funeral. It was about finally understanding that these people, the ones I'd spent my entire life trying to please, were never going to love me the way I'd hoped. And I was done trying. Ruben pleaded guilty. I didn't go to the hearing. I didn't need to. The judge sentenced him to probation, community service, and restitution, which meant for the first time in his life Ruben had to work. Not that he took it well. Ruben, you think you won? You think this is over? I swear to you, Alex, you'll regret this. I blocked his number. And then, finally, I cut the last thread that tied me to them. I went to the bank, closed the joint account my father had manipulated me into opening years ago, and removed my name from everything that linked me to him, Rosa, or Ruben. No more withdrawals for family emergencies. No more unpaid debts in my name. No more financial lifelines. And just like that, they were on their own. 3 days later, my father called. I answered. Not because I wanted to, but because I wanted to hear what he would say when he realized I was no longer his personal ATM. Alex, he started, his tone unusually calm. I just checked the account, and it's closed. I cut him off. I closed it. A long silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. You closed it? Yes, I replied. I did. His voice turned darker. What the hell is wrong with you? I almost laughed. Of course, that was his reaction. Not an I'm sorry. Not an I understand. Not an I should have been a better father to you. Just anger. Just entitlement. You really don't get it, do you? I said, shaking my head. You spent my entire life treating me like I was worthless. Like my only purpose was to give you what you wanted. And now that I've stopped, you act like I've betrayed you. You have betrayed me, he spat. I let out a slow sigh and then said in a very calm tone, No, Dad. You betrayed me first. He had no response to that. So I ended the call and never answered another one. A month passed. Then 2. Then 3. I moved out of my old house, sold the damaged property, rented out the apartment. I cut my father out of my life. Rosa. Ruben. Everyone. And for the first time in a long time I felt free. Not happy. Not yet. But free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The silence was the strangest part. For the first time in my life my phone wasn't vibrating with demands. No more calls from my father. No more guilt-tripping texts from Rosa. No more rage-filled messages from Ruben. At first it felt unnatural, like I was waiting for something to explode any minute. But after a few weeks, something inside me shifted. I started sleeping better. I no longer lived in a constant state of stress over unexpected expenses. I could breathe. And yet I still caught myself sometimes when I saw my phone screen light up, expecting another crisis to drop on me. But the calls never came. 'Cause finally they realized something. I wasn't their problem anymore. Of course, Ruben tried to drag me back down. He started with petty revenge. Spread lies amongst the extended family, twisting the story to make himself look like the victim. Ruben. Alex stole the house from me. Tricked Grandma into leaving him everything. Ruben. I was supposed to get my share, but he got greedy and kicked me out. Ruben. Now I have nothing, and he's sitting on 3 properties living like a king. Some cousins bought into the drama. Even an aunt called me, her voice dripping with forced politeness. Alejandro dear, don't you think you're being a little harsh? Ruben's going through a difficult time, and family should help each other out. I let her finish. Then I said, "Did he tell you he vandalized the house?" Silence. "Did he mention the police? The charges?" More silence. Finally a hesitant, "Well, no, but then maybe you should ask him about that before you lecture me." And I hung up. Without my financial support, reality hit Ruben fast. His probation required him to work, so he could no longer keep bouncing from one odd job to another, racking up excuses. He had no savings, no backup plan. And for the first time in his life, no one came to bail him out. I heard from Javi that he ended up renting a small rundown apartment in a rough neighborhood. Rosa and my father didn't take him in. Apparently, they weren't so generous when it came to their golden boy. The irony almost made me laugh. For years, they guilted me into supporting Ruben, painting him as helpless. But when I finally walked away, they abandoned him just as quickly. Because deep down, they never really cared. Not truly. They just cared about what they could get out of me. Rosa sent one last message before giving up. "Rosa, I hope you're happy, Alejandro. You've destroyed this family." I stared at those words for a long moment. Then slowly I typed back, "Me, I didn't, Rosa. I just stopped letting you destroy me." And I blocked her for good. Cutting ties with my father should have hurt more than it did. But after everything, there was nothing left to mourn. He'd already chosen Ruben over me. Over Nico. Over everything. He made his priorities clear. And I finally did the same. I wasn't his son anymore. Not in any way that mattered. The strangest thing was how normal life became. I wasn't rich. But without my family sucking up every penny, I had enough. I finally took a break from work. Traveled for the first time in years. Reconnected with an old friend. A woman I'd met in college but lost touch with when life got in the way. And slowly, painfully, I began to heal. Not just from my family but from losing Nico too. From all the years I spent giving to people who never cared. One night, months after everything ended, I got a text from Javi. "Javi, hey. Just wanted to say I'm proud of you, dude. I know it wasn't easy, but you did the right thing." I stared at the message for a long time, and for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to believe it. I never heard from my father again. At least not directly. Javi told me he still talked about me sometimes, usually with resentment, usually when someone mentioned Ruben's downfall. "He blames you for everything," Javi admitted one night. "He truly believes you ruined Ruben's life." I'd expected that. "And what about Rosa?" I asked. Same old, Javi said. "Still acts like you betrayed them. But between you and me," he hesitated, "she and your dad barely talk to Ruben anymore either." I let out a dry laugh. Of course they didn't. They'd always loved the idea of Ruben more than Ruben himself. They wanted a son they could pamper. A golden boy who made them feel important. But the moment he stopped being useful, the moment he became a burden, they dropped him. Just like they'd always dropped me. It took a long time to stop looking over my shoulder, to stop waiting for another call. Another crisis, another betrayal. But eventually the fear faded. And I realized something. I was free. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe anyone anything. I wasn't responsible for fixing Ruben's failures. I wasn't responsible for earning my father's approval. I wasn't responsible for carrying a family that had never carried me. I spent so many years believing I had to earn love. That if I gave enough, if I tried hard enough, they would finally see me. They would finally love me. But they never would have. And now I didn't care anymore. Javi and I stayed close. So did some other cousins, the ones who'd always seen the truth but never had the chance to say anything. I reconnected with my old friend. She wasn't just a friend anymore. And one day when I told her about Nico, about everything that had happened, I didn't cry. Not because I'd stopped missing him, but because for the first time his memory didn't feel like a wound. Felt like love. A year passed. Then two. And one day I got an email from Ruben. Subject: "Can we talk?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I clicked delete and moved on with my life. Final thought. Family isn't blood. It isn't obligation. It isn't selfless sacrifice. Family is the people who are there for you. The ones who care. The ones who show up when you need them most. And finally I had that. Finally I had them. And that was all I'd ever needed.